I'm here today with Casey Attebery, who I'm so glad to welcome. Casey is a senior AI engineer and data scientist whose work blends advanced mathematics, natural language processing, and graph theory to build intelligent retrieval systems and custom AI models. The reason I'm interested in talking to Casey is that he is an expert in the field of cymatics, which he has spent 15 years studying in depth, exploring the physics of liquid cymatics, and addressing many pseudoscientific claims with rigorous scientific understanding, and sharing his work with the public on Facebook as Mr. eScholar, which is where I actually have found you. But I found you first through this book about Bach flower cymatics that was published by Mackenzie Tickner some years ago. And she hired you to do the cymatic pictures of the Bach flower essences, which are stunning. I have to say, they're so beautiful and extremely activating to look at, which I think is the whole idea. But I want to know everything. And I know there's not time to learn everything, but how did you get into this? What rabbit hole did you fall down that led you to cymatics?
Yeah, so about 15, 16 years ago, I was teaching Waldorf science in general, so high school level. And so that a lot of Waldorf science, all of Waldorf science is Grotian based, and so experiential, non-paradigmatic. So rather than teaching the children what the paradigm says science explanations are, we present them with experiences and have them ravel it out themselves, and oftentimes coming to the conclusion that the paradigm has, in a lot of cases with magnetism and things that aren't quite fully really physically understood, it leads to other wild theories that gets them to think, right? So we were talking about sound and whether or not somebody with synesthesia can actually see sound. And that I did a quick search on YouTube at that time. YouTube was just now coming out, and found a short video where an audio engineer basically took a balloon and wrapped it around the open end of a metal can and cut out the other end. And he then put a little mirror at the middle of that balloon, the very center, and then put the open end up against a speaker, or in this case, a guitar amp. And then he just played sounds through the speaker, which went into the can and had a laser light shine on the mirror. And this was my first experience of cymatics at all. And this is right around the time, gosh, I forget his name. I'm sorry to this man, but he presented this music video where fire and robots and different cymatics things were happening. Neil, anyhow, I forget his name. So that was a very popular thing happening with cymatics, and the cymoscope was just coming out. So presenting that to the children and getting them to ask questions about what sound does to the air and things like that. That was the first thing. And then seeing how a single point of laser light could produce a real-time spirograph image where it just looks like a tattoo almost on the wall of the geometric symmetry. It blew my mind that sound is moving that fast in the air. But of course, we know the speed of sound, 760 miles per hour, really fast. So anyways, that was my first experiment in cymatics. And then from there, I just dove into the liquid membrane cymatics, and here I am.
It's really, you wrote here in your bio something about pseudoscientific claims. And I'm so curious, like, what is there about seeing this manifest that somebody could argue with? How is it not science?
Here's the thing. There's just a lot of pseudoscience in sound and resonance in general. So for example, the classic one I always fall onto is the 432 hertz mystery and whether or not that means anything. And a lot of people use cymatics to show that 432 is dominant or superior to 440. And one of the things I love about cymatics is that it actually shows that there is no frequency that means anything unto itself. The simple rate of oscillation means nothing until you present it into a system. And for just a quick example, we can talk about the basics idea later, but with cymatics, we generally use a speaker, and I often use just a screw top from a water bottle and put the top, that's blurred out for some reason, but
Oh yeah, okay.
the top on there, and that way you can screw that on and the speaker causes the fluid to move up and down. If you were to use, say, this size cup versus this size cup, a single frequency will produce different results in those different cups.
Different images, you mean?
Exactly, different images or no image at all. You might just have random turbulence in the water or in the fluid. So if you change the size of your vessel, meaning the diameter that you use, you're going to get much different results. On a similar hand with cymatics, you use a fluid with fluid cymatics. And if you change any aspect of that fluid, whether changing the surface tension or viscosity or density, you're going to change the way that fluid membrane reacts to whatever up and down oscillation you're producing. So
Cool.
440, there's a big meme going around that shows that 440 produces a lesser symmetrical image than 432. And the pseudoscience there is that's actually a lie, that it's not telling you that they're using this specific size vessel for, say, 432, but when you use 440, it's not going to look as great. The lie is that all you got to do is change to a smaller vessel, and now 40 will produce a better image rather than 432. So the ultimate teaching there is that, frequency means nothing until you present it into some sort of a system and see how it interacts with that system.
It's cool that you're talking about 440 and 432 because I spent many years as a professional musician in symphony orchestra. So 440 is the modern standard pitch for tuning, and like contemporary instruments are tuned that the A is at 440, right. And Baroque tuning is actually they go down to 415 or something like that. It goes way down. It's a whole different world. The instruments were not built to handle the higher tension of steel strings and stuff like that. So it's gradually crept up, but I think it's creeping up and up. Like European orchestras tend to tune at 444 already. And I don't know if there's something about our perception causing us to prefer I don't know if it's like there's more clarity or we like to hear things on the sharper side or something. Does that mean anything to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I dove into that because in order to say anything, I want to make sure that I know what I'm speaking of, and not just know it because I watched a TikTok video, but that I've studied it exhaustively. And in this day and age of AI and research, you can go and grab just the top level of something, but that's not very deep. So you need to really go deep and expose yourself to the phenomena. And yeah, you raised Baroque, and that's actually the longest period in time in history where you had a standardized musical pitch was A415 or 435 as it eventually became, but still the Baroque era had the much lower pitch. You had different instruments, and as you said, we started using steel strings as opposed to horsehair and different other things, and even nylon strings and different types of materials. And not to mention our cultural attitudes have changed. Baroque era, somber and medieval times coming out of that, and a lot of darkness, dark ages, a lot of pollution and plague and all kinds of things darkening the human spirit, but then we're lightening up, we're seeing more of a joy-filled sound. And of course, that pitch is drawing higher, and we're getting different instruments involved into the orchestra. Yeah, so all that to say that and that's just tuning. Tuning has nothing to do with cymatics. Cymatics right. Is really just a rate of oscillation. And that's the other thing is that people often say, oh, this image was used using A432. And there are some cymatics artists that hashtag 432, even though the signal was, say, 16 hertz or 15.5 hertz. It has nothing to do with 432, but they say I used a note that was in the key of 432, and it just doesn't matter.
No.
I'm sorry, it doesn't matter. And ultimately, I want to say this, the biggest impact for me in the pseudoscience world is that sound has nothing to do with the image that's being created. I had mentioned before we use speakers as the predominant mechanism for liquid cymatics, but all that is just a way of providing a rhythmic and a regular vertical oscillation. It's not a speaker that's doing the magic. I could literally get a metal piston and if I could use my foot to drive that piston up and down analog, I can produce the same effect in the fluid.
So this is something that really fascinates me. And I know that when I talked to you, whatever it was, a couple of weeks ago, I said cymatics is becoming a big deal. Maybe it's always been a big deal and I'm just like getting familiar with it. But I think people are starting to talk about it as being really relevant to the world of quantum physics, which I find so interesting because essentially it is an analog phenomenon. It is really interesting to think about something that is almost bypassing digital technology and having relevance in the quantum world as an analog phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's many relevancy to quantum mechanics. For one, obviously, wave coherence. You can have in a single dish, like I said, you could have a frequency that just creates disturbance, turbulence at the top. But the moment you reach a certain frequency, and it's like chaos theory, where you have these basins of attractors. Once you reach a certain frequency per fluid, per dish system that resonates with that dish system, that oscillation that's suddenly turbulent and all that just snaps into coherence and will oscillate into what we call a standing wave or resonant mode shape. And that's where the energy suddenly just reaches a minimum, where you've got tremendous amount of energy in the system, but it's able to mitigate it in a way that is harmonious. And so that quantum wave states for electrons, or just in general wave states in any system, it applies. But also what's interesting is the uncertainty principle kind of applies, in the sense that, say in this dish, I know a certain frequency will always, with this fluid, it'll always produce a fourfold shape. Okay. There's nothing quantum about that. That is definite science. We know that system will always behave in that way. However, what's uncertain and what's pretty cool, that it depends on literally every factor of the universe prior to this moment, is the orientation of that standing wave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if you have,
that I do.
So if you have and it really matters that if you have a perfect dish, so say you have a perfect dish where there's no alterations, there's no weird discrepancies on the bottoms or the edges, where it's a perfect circle, everything's right, then you know that frequency will create that standing wave. There's every condition of the universe brought about the way in which that say fourfold shape orients in the circle. And that is never reproducible unless you have, say, an imperfect system that causes that every time. But like I said, you could, and that, okay, there's many things I could say there, but I used to be into quantum code and quantum cryptography. And that's one way you could actually send a key for a code, the orientation in which a standing wave forms. It's once and only once. You can never reproduce it.
Wow. That is very interesting. It's peculiar.
Yeah. And so it's a fingerprint in that.
Yeah.
That exact experiment, every condition of every particle of the universe happened to align to create that way. Because you, again, theoretically, with infinite many degrees of a circle down to the molecules of the water, it was that many possibilities of orientation. So pretty cool.
Tell me about the dish. Is there anything to do with the material, that if the dish is glass or crystal or metal or?
Yeah, so that's, again, very physical. Physical science suggests that we need to have a flat bottomed side wall. So here's an example where I've got a side wall that's at a slant. And so what's going to happen is that the surface membrane, it's all about forces up and down, normal forces to gravity. So if, for instance, I put this onto the speaker and I have, say, that's at a slant because my table's not right, then I'll never have a perfect standing.
Right.
Be off in some way. So perfect balance, perfect everything, but a flat bottom, non-perpendicular wall is going to have non-regular forces on, say, this part of the surface that doesn't have anything directly below it. So that'll be a factor. So I prefer to have a container that has exactly 90-degree bottom, if at all possible. A lot of people use curved sloped bottoms. They'll all produce standing waves, but there'll always be some sort of inhibition that is going to prevent you from getting absolute perfection. So that's one thing, to have a flat vertical bottom. Also, this is a thin plastic. So one thing, cymatics, is that as it's going this oscillation up and down, not only is this whole system going up and down, but the fluid in it is going sloshing out like this.
Right.
So the faster you get that sloshing and the more dense fluid you get, the more this plastic will warp like that. And the more warp you get, that's imperfect symmetry there, the more, again, kind of friction or disturbance you'll have in trying to create that. So a very solid steel or aluminum actually works best. And then this gets to the last part I want to say, is how heavy the object is. So if you're using a steel, for instance, this is steel, and then I fill this with fluid, and I'm using a fairly small speaker here, that's going to be a lot of mass onto that speaker.
All right.
And there's something called impedance with a speaker. And if you were to go up to any speaker and you put your hand on it, it's not going to perform the same way, right? So when you've got too much mass on there, it's not going to perform the same way. So yeah, how heavy the stuff is, the structural integrity of the cup, and the actual physical properties of the cup. And one thing real quick, just to say the shape.
Yeah.
Here, obviously, this is a square shape. And by forcing a square shape to the cup, I'm always going to have 4, 8, 16, some sort of a relative or multiple of 4 in terms of the standing wave geometries. I'm never going to have, say, a 7-fold shape into this cup because I'm forcing that. But a circle, as we all know, circle is an infinite-sided polygon theoretically. So down to the actual molecular structure of the water and the molecular structure of the cup, it is, in practical purposes, a infinite circle. So we can have theoretically any n-numbered polygon standing wave down to the physical limitations of the fluid here. So, the fluid, depending on how flexible that surface is, and that's your surface tension, if it's too tight, then it's not going to flex in the way that you want in those nice shapes. So you'll get very rigid geometry. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. But if you start adding, say, a surfactant or rubbing alcohol to that fluid, then you're going to loosen the surface tension and make it more stretchy, so to speak. And then it'll get more bendy and be able to flex really well.
Oh, cool. I was going to ask you what you put in the water to make it more like viscous or more stretchy.
Yeah, so you want a very low surface tension. So you don't want it to be very tense at all at the surface. You want bendy surface. So you want some surfactants in there and you want that. Alternatively, you don't want a too low viscosity. Low viscosity means it's going to slosh around. The moment it starts going up and down, you might get drops flying out of the fluid. And so you want a fairly high viscous fluid. At the same time, you want low surface tension. So it's like opposites of what nature provides. A more viscous fluid will have a higher surface tension and vice versa. I, for about 5 years, explored every fluid I could imagine: raw milk, soups, broths, Kool-Aids, just juices, just everything that was considered a fluid. Even oobleck is a non-Newtonian fluid. It doesn't work very well. But anything that was a fluid that could move, I tried. And ultimately, I tried to get as scientific as I could about this. So I measured surface tension and viscosities of all these fluids I tried, mixing them, trying proportions, and being like a kid again and mixing anything I could that would blow up together to get something.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I arrived at a solution that, with a little black dye, here it is, black food coloring so that the light reflection can work really well. I got a fluid that will generate 19-fold geometries to 2-fold geometries and behave up to about 40 to 50 hertz down to 1 hertz. So I could do heartbeats and things like that. So I measured the surface tension and viscosity of this mystery fluid. And okay, I just typed that into actual Google 5 years ago and said, is there anything that just I can buy that already has this made so I don't have to measure it out every time? Turns out human blood.
Oh, wow.
Means that human
No
blood
way.
was exactly in that range of viscosity and surface tension. And it made sense that our bodies need to have low surface tension so that it's not sticking to everything, but somewhat high viscosity so it's not real thin and can actually be pushed through the capillaries.
Oh my God. I was going to cerebrospinal fluid or something when you were talking, like, what is it in our bodies? What is the fluid in our bodies that matches this
So the
viscosity and surface tension?
The most dominant fluid is our blood. And I was blown away. And so I actually went out and bought, still have it. Sorry, I don't have it here on my desk, but a lab certified blood mimicking fluid. And it's very common with ultrasound manufacturers and ultrasound equipment manufacturers. They've got to test their equipment. They don't want to go and get human blood to do it. So they actually have a physical fluid that matches every property other than its life-giving physical properties. And so that's what I used to then establish this mix. And I can post the link later, but I have got a live.
Oh, that's so cool. Ah.
And again, other than just, of course, it makes sense that nature needs some sort of fluid that has these somewhat similar properties that can do this stuff that we see. That's pretty cool finding there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So from there, maybe talk about sound healing a little, because when I was just at the Science of Consciousness conference in Barcelona, and there was some presenting of things. Specifically, I heard a really nice presentation of somebody doing Himalayan sound bowls. That was his thing. And he talked about the traditional use and placing the bowls around the person of different sizes in different tones or whatever, and how they're used, even how the bowls are made, which was in and of itself really fascinating in terms of the intention process that goes into it. Like that every place where they're making these according to traditional methods, they're putting them out in front of the moonlight and people are sitting around saying the traditional prayers and putting the intention in and all of that. But talk to me about sound healing.
Sure, yeah. So as you've mentioned, I've got this fairly heady background and academic and all that sort of thing. And at the same time, I've had my foot in teachings of esoteric nature and things that you can't quite find, say, in a journal paper, for example, but hold water in our cultural beliefs. So we may have anthroposophy and Rosicrucianism, where all that comes from, and things like that. So I've been involved in a sound working group. We call it a sound working because the word healing to me is just, in short, that's something that happens inside. I don't actually cause that when I do anything.
Right.
Body does something, right? So we call ourselves a sound working group called the Binaural Beat Brothers. And he had a gong or several gongs and would play gongs with all different mallets. And I had various didgeridoos, and we also had singing bowls and wood drums. And on top of all that, we would create soundscapes out of binaural beats.
Wow.
Yeah, and so played live, obviously that's a monaural beat, so that's not quite binaural, but the rhythm was still happening in the room, right? The one speaker can produce that same rhythm. But we would do that and create these experiences where just people are inundated with these very low frequency vibrations in a regular and resonant way. So what I have to say on that is all the research and experience that I have in all that. So we would do research on binaural beats and what effects certain things have and what can happen. And ultimately what we found and what I found is that it's like dream symbols, in the sense that you can never really create a library of this means that in terms of healing, in terms of using sound or any experience. But in short, what we found is what many cultures agree with, is that a low frequency vibrations can induce trance-like states. And you can actually do research on this, but when we use chemical anesthesia, what happens is that the brain actually becomes in a 10 hertz resonant frequency. So right now the brain has low frequency vibrations up to high frequency. So we have theta and alpha, delta, all these different bandwidths that are happening as I'm conscious, right? But in anesthesia, we basically see a 1 hertz frequency in the frontal lobe, and then the whole rest of the brain kind of resonates at 10 hertz. And that's something that happens. So again, low frequency and resonance and coherence all happening at once, right? So it seems that low frequencies are great at inducing these calm and very focused brain states, and resonance and coherence happens. And when that happens, we see all kinds of interesting things happen. We have out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. We have hallucinations with drugs. We have hallucinations without drugs. We have many experiences that happen. And so my understanding is that sound healing is just a way of calming this crazy mind that we have and getting it to resonate in a very syncopated, coherent way that allows then the nervous system to really do what it can do, and the immune system to do what it can do without days of our lives. And as the world turns, I use examples to distract our minds from doing things. And then not to mention, it's just out of this world to hear things that aren't typical noises of sounds that we hear every day. And it brings us into this kind of womb-like interesting place. And that's my opinion anyways on sound healing in short.
And you just said something really important. The womb is full of amniotic fluid, which may be of a similar viscosity and surface tension. It's not blood, but amniotic fluid is a thing. And all of the sounds of the environment and of the mother's heartbeat and all of that is going in to this fluid and finding resonance or creating standing waves or whatever. There's a lot of thinking around the impact on the amniotic fluid to the development of our bodies, of our mind.
Yeah, that's one thing I do want to address, blends what we're talking about now into what I mentioned before, is the pseudoscience idea, is that a lot of people think that what happens, say, in this cup is happening in every cell that I have in my body. And there's a theory that's spread out there that the membranes of my cells are producing those images that we see on these reflections. That's just it. Physically impossible. That just cannot happen. Because again, as I know, and as we can all know, with a fluid diameter of this shape, okay, that's going to be, say, 40 to 10 hertz. And this one is going to be even higher. And the smaller I go, the higher that frequency has to become. And on a cellular level, you're talking about ultrasound. And we do have that. We have transcranial ultrasound right now that pinpoints certain cells of the brain, certain areas of the brain, and we can actually resonate cells independently using focused ultrasound. But when we listen to music, or when we listen to binaural beats or sound healing, all of that it's completely again, from my scientific understanding and what I understand to be true from my research and experience, is that it's not a body thing at all. It's an entirely a brain thing and a system thing. Our nervous system, our digestive system, every system we have becomes resonant and coherent, and it can do its job in a more focused way. Yeah.
And what about dreams? Because I had a really cool one the other night relevant to what we're talking about. So tell me first about your work with dream symbology.
Yeah, just quickly, I had a dream 2 nights ago. I was undercover KGB agent, and I was responsible for keeping Putin safe, which was very interesting,
Oh,
very detailed. So yeah, I'm very interested in dreams as well. And that's been another part of my non-academic life, to the point where I do some AI research into dreams and things like that. Yeah, dreams, I had mentioned, it's like dream symbology. We can't have a library of what this means, because the way subjective terminology and words and experiences depend on every circumstance, right? So if I dream about an apple tonight, that might have a different meaning than when I dream about an apple tomorrow night, or if you dream about an apple tonight. Dream symbology is really all about, as I mentioned with the frequency, it's like what's happening in that system in that moment, the way that system is. You dreamt about an apple tonight based on everything that happened to you today and everything that happened to you in the past and everything you're thinking about in the future. And with that mindset, that system was like a cup with a certain fluid in it, and you went to sleep with that fluid. And out in our sleep, our brain is doing its thing. I can't say that I know anything about what dreams are, where they come from, but I do know that they happen in our sleep, and that they happen with our brain reaching some sort of a state. And in that instance, our brain, everything's a state, and our emotional body is in that state, and that frequency of apple or whatever that symbol was means something in that particular moment, that state. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be a whole different cup, most likely. I'm going to have a different fluid. I'm going to have a different size. I'm going to be thinking about different things. And tonight I dream about an apple, and it's going to be a totally different image. I got to understand what that image means in that particular state I was in when that image came to me. And this sound healing is no different. Looking at the Bach flower cymatics images is no different. That tonight you might reach for a rescue remedy because that's the one you want to go for, and you want to look at that image and it does some sort of thing. But tomorrow night you might be stressed about the exact same thing, but it might not be rescue remedy that's your go-to.
absolutely.
Grant this
Absolutely.
murder thing.
I had a dream the other night that was about a spirograph, which I haven't thought about particularly, except that, of course, I was looking at the cymatic images, and so it could have some relevance there. But spirograph, the thing from when we were kids,
Yeah.
and it either went on a long time or it came back multiple times, the image. But what woke me up out of my sleep was the idea that the information, I don't even know how to describe what this means. The information is not in the pattern, it's in the phase. And that was such a deep knowing. Like I said, I know that it's true, but I don't even know what it means. But it was the phase of how they don't line up exactly. And keep doing the same picture over and over again. Each time it comes around, that's why it makes a beautiful picture, because it's a little bit out of phase each time according to the little teeth in the grooves around the perimeter of the circle. So that was my dream.
Right.
It's all about the phase, baby.
Yeah, all about the phase. It is with light, for example. You could have polarized sunglasses, and what polarized sunglasses do is they just catch the light in different phases, right? Polarity of the light basically could be associated as a phase, basically a phase angle. And so you could have lenses that you shift them 90 degrees and you can block light entirely, right? But it's still all the same light. And quantum mechanics says the same thing. The phase is what matters, the spin or whatever you want to call it. It's all the same information, but the moment at which you catch it, phase is basically, if you think of a sine wave, where on that wave you are. Are you on the peak? Or are you in the valley? And in reality, an infinite sine wave, the peak, valley, the middle parts, they're all the same thing. It doesn't, infinite, it's all the same.
Yeah.
The moment it does matter because the phase, yeah, exactly.
So let me just ask you a bit about the Bach flowers in particular, because that's my thing. Hang on just one sec. Okay. So the Bach flowers, for anybody who's listening to this who doesn't know anything about it at all, we're talking about a class of vibrational medicine. These are non-chemical liquid medicinals that carry some kind of information structure from a range of 38 separate flowers from nature. Many of them, at least half of them, are tree flowers. They're not all botanical, like garden flowers. But the way that they're made is super interesting and not at all like homeopathy, which is my field of expertise from the last 30 years. Homeopathy is made by a process of diluting something over and over again until you exceed Avogadro's number of 10 to the minus 24th so that there are no molecules left. And what we observe clinically is that these medicines continue to have effect long after there has been no active chemical ingredient left in the dilutant. Bach flowers, on the other hand, are not put through that process at all. They are made by putting the flower matter, the plant matter, into pure water in a glass bowl in the sunlight. And you leave it there for a couple of hours, and then you strain out the fluid, and that's your medicine. So clearly, we're on another league of information transfer, of like some quantum process of extracting vibrational data here, which I could speak to at length. That's not the point. But you did the cymatic images of these 38 Bach flowers, and they're all quite different from each other. And I know that you said you could get different, like they're not carved in stone, as we say. You could do images by using a different size container or whatever. But talk to me about how you know which frequency to play for which flower. Like you're not putting the flower into the connection with the speaker in some way.
Right. Yeah. So
What happens there?
sure. Yeah. Just to bounce off more of what you're saying about the Bach flower imprinting idea, that I just had a quandary in myself of wondering if they use DI water or not, just deionized water or just actual water, because
It's actually spring water. So initially it would have been done by like finding water on the spot that came from a natural spring source.
so yeah, I would say then there's a lot to that, because we know that water structurally has an electrostatic structure, in a sense that it can organize and carry minerals in a certain way. And Victor Schauberger, I credit him for being one of the most influential hydrologists that isn't recognized. And he studied.
Say the name again. We just missed you because the connection wasn't good.
Sure, Victor Schauberger.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's credited as he lived in Austria and understood water, looking in the woods, and Steiner uses a lot of his education or his teachings in biodynamics and things like that. Basically, essentially, Victor Schauberger shows that water physically has the greatest potential to hold mineral content and structure at around 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Warmer than that, it starts losing it. Colder than that, obviously the molecular structure starts becoming rigid and freezing. So he found that about 34 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit, the water has the best structure. And it just so happens that's about the temperature in most spring water is that. And then, of course, that's something there. So water has that ability for impression and imprinting on we say energetic level, but I would have to say electromagnetic level in terms of the ions and everything else it's exposed to. So to your question, what I did for the Bach flower images, again, trying to maintain as much physical rigor as possible and not just fly off the seat of my pants with, this is what I think it should be. I looked up mass spectroscopy information for all these substances, except for Rescue Remedy, because I don't know what that is, right?
Yeah.
So for example, willow tree, I looked up the mass spectroscopy of a willow flower. And so if this information was present for the flower parts, I used it. Otherwise, I used for whatever information I had over some part of the fluid, or I'm sorry, part of the plant that was used. Yeah. So that's what I did, is look up all that mass spectroscopy information, which gives me a certain frequency. Often that frequency is way really high, right? It's a color. So what I did was I had to take that frequency and divide by 2 down until I got a frequency that I knew would work in this particular system. So in that sense, I've blown any relation out of the water to that physical thing. I mean, again, not to mention I did it just to work and say this cup, or actually I used this one here.
Okay, cool.
Anyway, I just took that frequency that I found from the physical information from that material, derived it down to, or reduced it down by octaves down to a suitable frequency. And then for the colors, that is again more just based on the plant material itself. So I would look at the flower, and I have a program that I wrote myself that gives me the RGB values of a particular.
Okay. Wow.
So take a picture, and I would find a picture of the flower, and then just take an average RGB value of that image. And so all the colors that go into that flower, I find one color that's basically the average of all that. And I have an invention that I created called the halo, and I can color every individual LED light a separate color. And I've got 3 rings of that. So I can just basically use a little remote control and get to every one of those lights, color that. So if a flower would have multiple colors or averages, I would just use that so to give it some depth and difference. So again, trying to be as physically connected to the material as possible, because my understanding based on how the Bach flowers essence that are created, like we said, is physical imprint. And as we've been talking about dream symbology and sound healing, it's all about what resonates with you in that particular moment, the system, the state you're in. And so try to make it as close to those plant materials as possible.
Very cool. Now, I don't know whether you played with this at all, but I would be curious about whether or not a drop of the flower essence in the cup would change the nature of the image that you get from one flower to the other. Did you play with that, or that's...
I did ask Mackenzie if she could supply me with some sort of representation of all of them, but then there's, whatever, 40 something different ones, and that was too tricky. But in other areas, I have done that. So after the Bach flower instance, I was contacted by a few herbalists who make tinctures and different glycerin-based things that they wanted to create labels for. And so they wanted me to create the Cymatics image in the same way I did the Bach flower. And since it's just a one-off kind of thing, they did send me samples. So I dropped the samples in. I didn't notice, I did for my own scientific purposes before and after, and didn't notice any difference.
Okay.
And again, my understanding of how these are made, if there was anything physical or energetic in that fluid, even if there was, let's just say there's absolutely everything in that fluid about that material, I'm not going to know what size vessel to use, which one
Exactly.
best, right? There's no physical dimensions that tells me that this material should be in this particular fluid. And that gets me where part of the major pseudoscience of cymatics comes at, where you see a particular image. A lot of people think that image is that frequency, and it's just not. There's no relationship that whatsoever. And so it wouldn't have mattered if I chose this or this fluid or that shape, or with this vessel, a drop of that fluid or all the fluid in there. I would have just had to choose some sort of physical system that works well with that viscosity and that surface tension. And that's what I'm working with.
It's so tantalizing. Like, it's so tantalizing, the idea of making the frequency of something manifest and visible, but it's so in line with the impenetrable nature of the quantum state that we don't get to see that. We're playing with something around it,
Right.
but we don't get to have an absolute.
Right. And that's a great point, because again, going back to the supposition that even if that fluid contains something, say I get this Bach flower essence and it has very potent energy in it, and I go and I want to make that visible, the act of putting it into a cup and vibrating it in this way is going to change whatever is in that fluid that I'm expecting to see as a result. So now, say I do get an image, that image has nothing to do with that fluid. And that fluid was. And I've now reconstructed that fluid or that system, that energy is now showing me what that thing is in this cup. And so if there is energetic information in that fluid and I'm relying on that, that'd be very dangerous to go. And a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to go energize my water with this cymatics device. And I've actually had people come to me for business ideas. They wanted to create water bottles that will create cymatics images in the surface of the fluid in the bottle. And they're saying, oh, if we use this frequency, you could do that. And I'm like, whoa, because say that frequency does do this. I don't know if I don't have the information to know if that is creating, say, a alchemical toxin in the water that's now.
Yeah, exactly. How would you know?
So, yeah.
I think that what you intuited about how to accomplish getting cymatic images for the Bach flowers is closer to whatever, I want to say, like whatever we could see in nature, whatever could be coherent with the message of the plant, because the fluid is designed by nature. This happens naturally with dew, like the condensation from the air, the water on the flower petals or the flower parts or whatever, that creates the same kind of remedy. The method of putting flowers in the sun is a way to scale that. Obviously, you can't run around collecting dewdrop little flower petals. It's not very scalable. But that has a meaning, which is not necessarily designed to be then translated in this way. Like your idea of somehow finding information from the tree or the plant itself that could be represented as a frequency through mass spectroscopy and then played as a sound, you're getting at the information in a different way that makes it relevant instead of taking something that already exists and doing something with it that would be irrelevant.
Yeah, and I absolutely stake no claim that what I do has any meaning other than what you said, just doing it as relevant as possible and staying within the boundaries of if there is anything to this, it's going to have to be something like this way.
And it's art. You are an intermediary for itself as art in a unique and creative and beautiful way. And I don't know if it has to have any meaning necessarily. It doesn't have to have an analogous meaning to what the flower essence would have in the way that it's being used as a medicinal agent.
Right. Yeah, it's like going back to the dream symbology that apples and dreams mean nothing. You cannot say that an apple means anything. It only in that moment. And once that moment's gone, that's the other thing is that I've had experiences and dreams where I still haven't quite understood the meaning. And I know that probably in 10, 15 years, maybe I'll have an experience. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and then I'll get it. And that's what that moment or that dream was for. It was meant for that moment, not for any time in between.
If we could talk about time, and that's another whole rabbit hole. But tell me, where is this going for you? What are your upcoming projects? I know there's something on your website about heartbeat and fetal heartbeat. Like, what are you doing with that?
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things I found so far in 15 years of doing cymatics is seeing it in live action. So I've done some things with bands where I display cymatics. That's really tricky because all music our frequencies way higher than what happens in any cymatics cup. Cymatics cups are infrasound, lower than what can be really heard. And the moment you start going into sound, it's such a high frequency that the water sprays out of the cup and you can't do it. Unless you got a really small cup, then you're limited to only using that small thing. Whereas a band has vocals, it has a guitar, has a drum, a bass, various many different frequencies, very big bandwidth, large bandwidth. So can't really do anything there. But one of the things I found is that I had a heart rate monitor that I had hooked up to lights. And so I would make lights flash with my heart rate. And I thought, what if I just put it to the speaker? And I just put the strap on my chest and hooked it up to the speaker, the fluid. And sure enough, 1 to 2 hertz was enough to generate standing waves in the particular vessel I was using. And that's one of the things I started offering is that people with an app on their phones, there's actually an app that's like ultrasound. It's not really ultrasound, but it's a really adjusted digital way to capture sound. And with your phone microphone onto your chest, you could actually pick up your heartbeats People would send them in, and then I would just play with fluids and vessels until I found one that worked, record that to them and send it back. And so you could actually see your heartbeat. Again, you're not seeing your heartbeat, but it's pretty cool. But I think the most interesting application of that is, though, in real time. We're all wearing Fitbits and we're measuring heart rate variability and checking on what our heart's doing over time. In these videos, every single video I've ever done with heart rates, you can see that the pattern is there, and you'll hear a skipped beat or a slight delta between two different beats. That changes the pattern. It'll restart all over again or be a different pattern all of a sudden, then come back to that other one. And I started realizing, wow, this is a cool way to actually visualize in real time heart rate variability, the way in which your heart rate changes, right? Obviously, it's impractical, but I thought it'd be cool if we could all have little analog water fluid things that are pumping, and we can actually see, oh, I'm starting to get stressed. And rather than seeing just some sort of a graph or chart of a heart rate, to seeing fluid and shapes. And then you're focused to say, okay, I want to keep my heart rate in this pattern and not get outside of that so I can maintain this pattern. I think that's pretty cool to see. And then, of course, heart rate images for your fetus. Got one child myself, and just going through that, hearing the heartbeat is one thing, but then imagine you're in the office there and you're seeing then the fluid do its thing. And you're like, oh, my baby's healthy. And it just, yeah, pretty cool.
I just spoke to somebody today who came from a doctor's appointment and heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time. So what a cool thing that is.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I offer, is to actually a package deal. You send me in a picture of the footprint and the information, and I can create an about me kind of a page to put in your baby book that has the cymatics image, the footprint, and all the information.
Oh, what a great idea. That's lovely.
Yeah, so I took that and did something similar with cat purrs. So looking for natural sounds that are interesting to us, that are regular and produce something cool. And cat purrs, their dominant fundamental frequency in that purr is 25 hertz, perfect range for these cubs. So again, finding the right fluid vessel combination for a particular cat purr you send in, I can create a video and an image of cat purrs. And so mixing that in with drawing, I do drawings for cats. So there was one client where I drew their cat and provided the cymatics image on a folding display, and their cat had just passed away. So it was a memoriam for their cat. And just interesting ways to apply this not really relevant, but cool art to share more about this kind of.
It is very cool. And I think it's becoming more and more relevant in ways that might surprise us. And I personally think that this idea of all the theories of consciousness that there are now, of which there are hundreds actually, of philosophers and physicists trying to make sense of what we know now from quantum physics, which is that nothing is what it seems. When we look closely and deeply enough at something, we get into a whole different world of what reality is. And the idea that nothing really exists until we apply some consciousness to it by seeing it or measuring it, observing it, whatever we want to say. There is a race on at the moment for finding this interface between the manifest world and whatever the parts of our mind or the parts of our cells that create or host some kind of consciousness. This is a really big deal at the moment. And I think the idea of cymatics and what this technology represents really could turn out to be very highly relevant to that search. So cool time to be doing this work.
Indeed, quite cool. And yeah, I grew up with the quantum interest with string theory and everything else happening, and now seeing AI solving questions. And it definitely is a matter of time before we see some sort of interesting application of resonance. I'll just call it resonance because it doesn't have to be sound or whatever, but just the idea of resonating with energy or information. That's definitely going to be the key term for the next while for a lot.
Yeah, we didn't even have time to talk about all your AI stuff, but we'll have to have you back another time and dive into that. But this has been great, Casey. Thank you so much for doing this. Tell people where they can find you. Of course, I'll put all the info in the show notes, but where do you hang out online?
Sure, yeah. I'm not really online much, but if I am, I can be on Facebook or Instagram, YouTube. Mystery Scholars is there spelled out, or I forget what it is, but my handle's out there somewhere. But I'm out there on Facebook as Mystery Scholar, and you can catch me there. Information about AI, cymatics, dreams, and everything that we're continuing to work on.
Fantastic. This was great. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Tracy. Yes, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, he's going to have to turn off the recording. Okay, that's it. We're done. Thank you, Neil.